Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Since the month of October 2021 is fucking stacked with new music from some of the hottest bands in metal today, including Mastodon, Dream Theater, Black Veil Brides, Cradle of Filth, Full of Hell, Archspire, and many fucking more, I'm gonna take a quick moment to remind y'all to subscribe to the Metal Meltdown if you haven't already, so that you can receive updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. Thank you for your time. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about this brand new EP from Norwegian black and progressive metal legends, Enslaved. For just about 30 years now, Enslaved have been responsible for some of the most innovative and exciting music to emerge out of the Norwegian heavy metal scene. Early records like Eld, Bloodham, and what is, in my opinion, one of the greatest black metal albums of all time, Frost, stand out still to this day as definitive moments for the second wave black metal genre and the Viking metal subgenre. And while some of their Norwegian black metal peers found themselves really struggling to remain relevant in the early to mid 2000s, Enslaved continued to expand and experiment, bringing in new influences from progressive, alternative, and post-metal, elevating their sound to something far more elegant, cinematic, and powerful and poignant. Which almost inevitably has resulted in some incredibly fascinating and entertaining music through records such as Isa, Below the Lights, Vertebrae, Retier, and last year's kind of surprise hit Utgard, which saw the band incorporating influences from classic progressive rock into their burly Norwegian black metal sound, complete with Hammond organs and strings and woodwind instruments, brass instruments such as trumpet and saxophone, these very angular rhythmic patterns and time signatures, a very raw and organic production and sound mix. Honestly, saying it all out loud right now, I'm reminded more of King Crimson or Gentle Giant than Enslaved, but no, this is very much an Enslaved record, and it very much kicked my fucking ass. For all of these reasons, I've been somewhat impatiently awaiting the release of this new EP, Planets to the Caravans, and I'm happy to announce that now that I have it in my hands and I've spent a good, respectable amount of time with it, that it does a great job of following in the footsteps of Utgard and condensing everything that made that album so exciting into a smaller and more accessible package, while continuing to introduce some new ideas into Enslaved's wide sonic palette. First things first, I don't know if there are any underlying stories and themes connecting these tracks. I don't know for sure if this is a concept album per se, or perhaps in this case a concept EP, but I will say that it does have the flow and the feel and the structure and the size and scale of a concept record. It is a very bold and cinematic record. It feels genuinely very epic with a lot of clean vocals and these very disturbing hypnotic vocal harmonies contrasted with some raucous kind of blackened heavy metal riffs and some classic prog rock influences and psychedelic soundscapes. At times I'm weirdly reminded of this dystopian sci-fi hellscape of the Dune novels and films. Opening cut and title track Caravans to the Outer World starts this off on a very somber and mysterious note with some very smooth keyboards and strings, then transitioning into some very bold, declarative, triumphant kind of blackened heavy metal swings and riffs. It's a very energetic cut for a bit. It's not quite black metal, but it's definitely very acidic and toxic, much like some classic Enslaved recordings. On that same note, it does have an incredibly icy barrage of blast beats and tremolo riffs, contrasted with some very serene, clean vocals and harmonies. This distinctly feels like something that very well could have been on the Frost record back in the day, albeit with much better production value. Then transitioning into a flurry of very strained and anguished passages that would not be out of place on a post-rock record, and then transitioning into a flurry of gyrating progressive rock jams and grooves that have a distinctly Middle Eastern flavor to them. Remarkably, then again transitioning into the following track, Intermezzo 1, which is a barrage of slow and somewhat intentionally monotonous kind of psychedelic prog rock. I'm reminded of the Elders record from last year, Omens, but I'm also kind of to some extent reminded of like a slower, more drugged out take on like Crack the Sky era Mastodon. The way that it intentionally drawls and slogs at this very tedious pace may put some off, but I found it very effective. It kind of feels as if you're walking with your back to a sandstorm, like it's just so harsh and brutal and unforgiving. Alongside the following track, Rune 2 the Epitaph, which introduces some Gregorian-style chanting and some more progressive psychedelic soundscapes contrasted with more savage and tribal rhythms, builds a lot of tension and momentum, which then leads directly into the closing cut, Intermezzo 2, which initially has the weight of like a classic Dream Theater cut, particularly with its very muscular and triumphant lead guitar and synthesizer riffs and harmonies. It's a genuinely pretty badass moment on the record. Now, I will admit that this song, and in turn the entire EP, ends on a somewhat abrupt and anticlimactic note, especially when you consider how much time is spent building all of this tension and atmosphere. But honestly, that is the closest thing to an issue I have with this EP. There's not a single moment of music I genuinely dislike. The production is fucking stellar. The performances are fantastic. I think this is weirdly a more cohesive package than Utgard. Like, a lot of the prog rock transitions were a touch jarring on that album, particularly on some of the earlier cuts, but this felt a lot more natural, a lot more seamless, and perhaps even better developed and fleshed out. I'm going to give this a very enthusiastic 4 to 5. I think this is a great EP. So great that I wish it wasn't an EP. I kind of wish this was a full-blown album. I kind of want to continue existing in this fascinating little universe that Enslaved have constructed. It's wild, it's unpredictable, it's incredibly immersive and harsh, and yeah, I think I would argue right now that maybe it is better than Utgard, and I really liked Utgard. I liked that album a lot. It kind of makes me think that, hey, instead of making us wait for 4 or 5 years for a new album, maybe Enslaved should put out some more EPs on a semi-regular basis. It might be pretty cool. I don't fucking know, just a thought. Feel free to do with that information whatever you like, Enslaved. No doubt in my mind, prog rock and prog metal nerds, especially those who have been avidly following Enslaved over the course of the past 15 years, are going to love this EP. And I would weirdly recommend this to a newcomer because I think this does a great job at showing just how intelligent and experimental and ambitious Enslaved are without going into like extremely shocking or uncomfortable territory. Like, this isn't as dark or as brutal as earlier records, and it's not quite the wallop to the head that Utgard was either. It is, despite everything, a very lean and accessible package. So 4 to 5, great EP, holy shit, Enslaved, rule, duh, definitely check this out. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.